In his last epistle to his convert, scribe, and co-author Timothy, the Apostle Paul, formerly known as Saul of Tarsus, wrote, "For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lust shall they heap to themselves teachers having itching ears. And they shall turn away their ears from the truth, and shall be turned unto fables." Words prophetically describing a current public health crisis in which even the Washington Post had written, months of discord around the coronavirus epidemic have transformed the cloth mask into a potent political symbol touted by Democrats as a key part of communal responsibility. Labeled by some GOP leaders as a sign of government overreach, and as a scarlet letter pinned on the week. An article presented under the title "Spate of New Research Supports Wearing Masks to Control Coronavirus Spread," but disclosing a caveat 4 paragraphs below the headline, which stated, "Our findings suggest in multiple ways that the use of masks is highly protective in healthcare and community settings," said the author of the review, Holger Schoenemann, an epidemiologist and physician at McMaster University in Ontario. But that conclusion came with an important caveat. "We have low certainty in that," Schoenemann said, meaning the authors cannot be strongly confident in the result. Hello, my name is Major Mike Webb, and at least indirectly, as a retired member of the intelligence community, recently, both the President and the United States Supreme Court have tasked me to report on fascinating phenomena, which may be of great interest, with as many as 3 in 10 Americans by December identifying as nuns, not affiliated with any faith denomination, up 6 points since the pre-pandemic estimate that had already found their numbers exceeding those affiliated with the Roman Catholic Church, just like he had tasked the intelligence community to look into the origins of a novel coronavirus, chasing a needle in a haystack, a question still without answers, while the Defense Department was delving into refining and clarifying knowledge on potential visitors from space. For the next few months, I will be addressing the topic of what the government does not want you to know about the existence of God in an unclassified format, which we might just, although it's in season, describe as Jesus Christ, extraterrestrial. And in the next installment, we shall attempt to focus upon a topic described by the writer John Milton, Paradise Lost, a topical conversation during a religious season that is focused on the theological topic of soteriology or salvation, as we continue to parse what is known by the government about this phenomenon described as God, and what the government refuses to tell you. But before proceeding to that exotic port of call, first, some preliminary observations in prologue to provide a broader perspective as we consider the possibility that Jesus may or may not have been essentially an extraterrestrial alien visitor, who, like some believe of other aliens, may someday return. Within Christianity, according to Pew Research Center, we had in the December 2019, as a novel coronavirus was emerging in China, announced its standing of a robust collection capability that had been targeted only at 318,000 Christian churches in America, and that had discovered in what had been given the curious name, the Religious Repression Project, that only about 60,000 Christian churches even possessed a capability to perform services online, to which they would be directed during pandemics. It is well established that the declines in affiliation fell not mainly on Roman Catholicism, the largest denomination, but rather had been concentrated in the Protestant denominations. And today, 40% of U.S. adults are Protestant, of that 63%. A group that is broadly defined to include non-denominational Christians, and people who describe themselves as just Christians, along with Baptists, Methodists, Lutherans, Presbyterians, and members of many other denominational families. The Protestant share of the population is down 4 percentage points over the last 5 years and has dropped 10 points in 10 years. By comparison, the Catholic share of the population, which had ticked downward between 2007 and 2014, has held relatively steady in recent years. As of 2021, 21% of U.S. adults describe themselves as Catholic, identical to the Catholic share of the population in 2014. So essentially, Catholics lost absolutely nothing during the pandemic. The loss was sustained primarily in the Protestant churches that remained closed even while the Catholic Church was reopening. While not notably in the Commonwealth of Virginia, which typical of the American South finds only around 44% of the residents affiliated with any faith at all, nearly 20 points below the American average. With Protestantism, evangelicals continue to outnumber those who are not evangelical. Currently, 60% of Protestants say yes when asked whether they think of themselves as born-again or evangelical Christians, while 40% say no or decline to answer the question. Intriguingly, this pattern exists among both white and black Protestants. Among white Protestants, 58% now say yes when asked whether they think of themselves as born again or evangelical Christians, compared with 42% who say no or decline to answer the question. Among black Protestants, evangelicals outnumber non-evangelicals by 2 to 1, 66% versus 33%. Evangelical, depending upon that denomination of born again, whatever that means in their minds. Overall, both evangelical and non-evangelical Protestants have seen their shares of the population decline as the percentage of U.S. adults who identify with Protestantism has dropped. Today, 24% of U.S. adults describe themselves as born again or evangelical Protestants, down 6 percentage points since 2007. During the same period, there has also been a 6-point decline in the share of adults who are Protestant but not born again or evangelical, from 22% to 16%. And as noted in the prior video installment, religion has become a central part of an identity politic by coincidence. Hence, beyond a schism between science and religion, it is apparent that at least from a competition perspective, or market share, as we say in economics, there continues to be amongst the largest denominations what might fairly be described as a civil war between those described as Roman Catholic and those described as Protestant. And, of course, Protestants amongst battling against each other. And this despite an aspirational effort in 1960 to engage in ecumenical ministry after the pronouncement of Vatican II, using the Nicene Creed to unite the varying religious Christian sects around some basic doctrinal issues that both appeared to have shared in common. And there is credible evidence to suggest that the divisions between the Christian denominations is not an aberration from the experience of other religious sects, both in a general application for all competing sects, but also for those smaller sects within them, divided and apparently being conquered, therefore, with the Roman Catholic Church triumphant, at least in edging out the others, in terms of market share, despite the presence of a constitutional guarantee for protection under the First Amendment, so that, as James Madison had contemplated in Federalist 51, would shape the consciences of their membership to establish an extra republic, to provide a check and balance against the overreaching tendencies of even the government of separated powers that had been proposed under the Constitution, And although described by Thomas Jefferson as separated by a wall, nonetheless it was very clear to the framers or founders that these separated churches were nonetheless a political power in this philosophical sense. And with still over 60% of Americans at least describing themselves as Christian, if majority rules, it might fairly be stated that this remains, at least nominally, a Christian nation of majority, in which, as John Adams had stated, our Constitution was created for a religious and moral people, wholly inadequate to govern any other people. And today, just like at the founding of the Democratic Republic, during the dawn of the age of reason, there was a raging debate pitting men of reason between men of faith, even finding one mathematician, Pascal, under deep criticism for his logical formulation to support, but not to prove, a belief in God, positing that if all life was finite and would eventually expire, the safe bet would be to believe in God rather than to reject God, because the price of belief upon a proof that God did not exist would be moot. As Woody Allen says in Hannah and her Sisters, I would be dead, because the price of belief upon a proof that God did not exist would be moot, and you would cease to exist. However, if you had rejected God and lost the essentially what amounted to a wager, the eternal price would far exceed the benefits in a finite life and economic conception of this faith game from which the nuns have, some at least, have decided to opt out. And this life based upon a gambler's strategy to win at a casino might accrue the social benefit or greater public good, with or without eternal reward and punishment of all acting with virtue, improving the lives of all, even if based upon a fiction that there is some eternal reward. And this question, nonetheless, is an inquiry about which, on evidence, more and more nuns are seeking to postpone, even though logically it eventually arises at the end of life, when those existential questions are ultimately answered, prompting many, according to Pew Research, to reconsider their thoughts about religion, as it did for Dr. Benjamin Franklin, who had for most of his early life, like the nuns, boldly stood opposed to faith in elevation of reason. But like Galileo, before the Inquisition, at least as depicted by Bertolt Brecht in a work often praised by Marxists, was a man of science who had examined the instruments that would become his torture and decided that he was old and was willing to compromise his dedication to professing science in the face of danger. A fear that at least one Islamic terrorist, Khalid Muhammad, a planner of the 9/11 attacks, did not possess, having endured as many as 83 torturous waterboard sessions in 1 month and failing to crack under pressure, or what some interrogators and counterintelligence might describe as the angel dust factor, imported by religious convictions that do not consider the science, but instead transform an I to a thou, a combat multiplier that, at least to those providing internal security for a nation, would present as a problem for which traditional means of ensuring compliance would be wholly inadequate. Similar religious zeal has been characteristic of many associated with insurrectionary causes, including the leader of the slave revolt, Nat Turner, who was finally captured at Jerusalem, Virginia, a holy named place, and also John Brown, the abolitionist, who had been captured at Harper's Ferry before the war between the states in 1859, in a daring raid led by Colonel Robert E. Lee when he was in the Union Army, and before that part of the Commonwealth of Virginia had seceded from the whole state to create West Virginia, which had fought on the side of the Union as a slave state amongst 5 other slave states, somewhat dispelling this idea or misconception that it was a war between slave states and free states. And in biblical times, During the rule of the Roman Empire, there was a great concern about those more zealous amongst the Jewish community who had expected the coming of a Messiah to set off what they believed would be a political insurrection, a religious fanaticism that assumed very practical secular problems for the ruling regime of Romans. And neither the sanity of that individual, Messiah, the validity of his authority, or the veracity of the prophecy was an issue for the Romans from an operational point of view, since it was enough that a sufficient number of separatists did believe the prophecy, like our stop-the-steal persons after the last election, and that created an enemy or potential threat to the ruling class in the state. And into this contemporaneous setting, a baby born in Bethlehem. And for the present purposes, let's simply assume that he is not Jesus Christ, Son of God, but an extraterrestrial, which technically he would be if he was the Son of God. So we would expect the same result. This is important because, as observed in the last video installment, some 51% of Americans agree that observations of aerial phenomena by Defense Department personnel at least probably provide proof of life on other planets. As such a sighting in Jerusalem would find some resonance in that community. And there were some celestial observations even in the Christmas story, to include angels and brightly shining stars, while up to 81% deny, despite Defense Department interest, that these aerial phenomena present a credible threat to national security. And with about 2/3 of Americans, 65%, saying their best guess is that intelligent life exists on other planets, this would create a national security problem of some great order, especially if these believers might join in league with the aliens to attack the Capitol, the White House, and attempt a coup or insurrection to establish a new government or new order, and would merit consideration by the Department of Defense, for simply practical reasons. And for those convinced that visitors from outer space are coming or returning, there is assurance in the 9-page DoD report under the category of utter, where these considerations are given their merited weight. But for other categories, for unexplained aerial phenomena, are more directed from a national security perspective with known probable threats, including actions by those foreign or even domestic actors who might pose a threat to the government of the United States in insurrection without assistance from the aliens. And with this in mind, it's not difficult to imagine why the Roman rulers might consider the punishment of crucifixion, or this person of history acknowledged, which was an agonizing methodology of death that had been perfected for over 500 years to provide an example for all, and reserved exclusively for enemies of the state. So the likelihood that even if a friendly alien like E.T. or the Vulcans were to arrive, the response from the government would probably not be to roll out the welcome mat, as you may have seen in the movies. And even Isaac Asimov had by 1940 began to imagine in science fiction the Galactic Empire, based upon the Roman Empire, as recorded in Edward Gibbon's The History and Decline of the Roman Empire, a history book that once had been required reading, at least in some parochial high schools, certainly Jesuit schools. And accordingly, long before the evil empire or Star Wars, the Galactic Empire had 25 billion planets spread across the Milky Way galaxy, a human imperial civilization that reigned for 12 millennia, with the seat of imperial authority whose population exceeded 40 billion before it was eventually sacked by rivaling adversaries. Yes, not even peace in the galaxies. And the most persons involved in national security, like those who have built mathematical models regarding potential for galactic visitors, assume that life, no matter where it might be found in the universe, will essentially be the same in biological form with which scientists are the most familiar by empirical observation, our self-bias. The thought of wholly righteous and philanthropic society of aliens taking a 5-year mission to simply boldly explore new life and life forms and new civilizations with not even an inkling of imperial conquest is simply not supported by any evidence and would amount to an aspirational hope and a prayer, or as Mrs. Spock might say, fascinating but not rational. So, was Jesus Christ another E.T., Superman, or Vulcan ambassador from the Interplanetary Federation of Planets, hoping to provide us alien technology and warp speed capability? There is a Star Trek episode featuring Dynasty's Joan Collins, and even Captain James Kirk tells his chief science officer that he should take the precaution to hide his pointed ears if he wanted to survive an encounter with mankind. So let's pause here and continue in our next video regarding the extraterrestrial Jesus God Unclassified, with the post-pandemic topic we had hoped to arrive at in this video, Paradise Lost. Who woke up surprised? This briefing is unclassified, as you will. My name is Major Mike Webb, and by God, I am running for your Congress. This year, resolve to do the right thing, and we shall make America great again. Honest. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.
Thunk, I could have had a vaccine.